Please be seated. And let us pray. Holy God, may the words of my mouth and meditation of all of our hearts be worthy and acceptable in your sight, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Who do you say that I am? Last week, we reviewed how the disciples responded to this question Jesus posed. And Peter spoke on behalf of the group, saying that they saw Jesus as the Messiah, essentially a political leader and a force to be reckoned with, a king to win battles, someone the Jews had been waiting for. Jesus immediately orders them not to tell anyone and proceeds to teach the disciples how they've misunderstood. It's difficult for them to believe that suffering, death, and resurrection are tied to Jesus' role as the Messiah. In their society during their time, political leaders just don't suffer. Jesus points out to Peter that the disciples' failure to understand this is due to their sights being set on the world rather than on the divine. In Mark's Gospel, we see a pattern of discipleship instruction emerge. There is a prediction of Jesus' death, followed by the lack of understanding by the disciples, and then a lesson on discipleship. So listen now as this pattern repeats itself in Mark chapter 9, verses 30 through 37. They went on from there and passed through Galilee. He did not want anyone to know it, for he was teaching his disciples, saying to them, "The Son of Man is to be betrayed into human hands, and they will kill him. And 3 days after being killed, he will rise again." But they did not understand what he was saying, and were afraid to ask. Then they came to Capernaum, and when he was in the house, he asked them, "What were you arguing about on the way?" But they were silent, for on the way they had argued with one another, who is the greatest. He sat down, called the 12, and said to them, "Whoever wants to be the first must be last of all and servant of all." Then he took a little child and put it among them, and taking it in his arms, he said to them, "Whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me, and whoever welcomes me welcomes not me, but the one who sent me." May God add a blessing to the reading, the hearing, and the doing of this, God's holy word. Amen. It seems like the moment a child is born, they are thrust into this ongoing competition we call life. We compare how quickly they walk and talk and read and socialize. And then there's the introduction to sports through select leagues where we have 7-year-olds try out and audition. As a parent of teens, I find myself wanting to say life isn't a competition. To enjoy your youth, learn, and be as compassionate as possible. But then I turn around and I ask about grades because a decision on college is just around the corner. And that means striving for the best grades, the highest test scores, and to earn the most scholarship dollars. I'm sure you're familiar with this quest in life that we have for being first. Our post-college life, we feel like we need to be the best candidate for any job, beat everyone else out, the best candidate for a house, and for even a partner in life. Additionally, these things give us something impressive to say when we're hit with that dreaded question by a stranger. "So what do you do?" As if that sums up our whole being. Why do we have this urge to measure up to society's standards? Throughout my internship, I'm required to write theological reflection papers. As I turned in the first one to Pastor Joe for his review, I thought immediately to myself, I want to be the best intern this church has hired. And then I thought about how that focus on myself, I was also simultaneously just discounting and minimizing the contributions and experiences of the previous interns. Plus, I was studying this passage in the gospel, and I thought, I better not say that. So I quickly held my tongue before those words came boastfully flowing out of my mouth, which you have now heard, of course. And I'm not saying that being the best that you can be and striving for that goal is necessarily wrong, but we need to understand and be aware of how ambition and greatness seeking can result in unintended consequences. Much like a winner's podium at the Olympics, we place ourselves above or below other people forgetting who they are and forgetting who we are in the process. We can easily get caught up in this momentum of the competitive merry-go-round that society wants us to remain on. So maybe we're not so different from the disciples of the first century after all. Since the disciples hoped for Jesus to be the next major political and military leader, any association with Jesus could only improve their own social status. But in their confusion about what Jesus was predicting and teaching, they tried to overcome their own insecurities by turning on one another and bragging. We don't know exactly what it was that the disciples said to one another, but we're told that they were arguing who was the greatest. Maybe Peter said, "Look, Jesus called me first and even had me attend his top secret meeting up on a mountain. I'm clearly the greatest." Of course, John and James would argue, "Hey, we were there too. That doesn't mean that you're better than us." And Andrew might even point out that Jesus came to my house to heal my mother-in-law, so I'm clearly a top contender. They each presented their past accomplishments to justify that designation of greatest disciple. With such a focus on the best in their individual selves, they missed the point. When Jesus asked them, "What were you arguing about?" the disciples were quiet. It's likely they felt too embarrassed to answer the question because they knew Jesus would be disappointed in their behavior. I mean, we already know that the disciples had been with Jesus long enough to witness that this man did things different than the way society says they should be done. Or maybe they felt caught. Just by Jesus asking that question, they felt like he already knew what they had been discussing, the topic of their debate. Sort of like how a child is suspiciously quiet when a parent asks how something's become broken. They just know. And it's in the what happens next that I get really intrigued. It catches my attention. First, Jesus waits until they're out into a house, out of the crowd, to ask the disciples about the argument. He lets the discussion continue on the road, but he postpones his response until they're in private. So at first, with that indication, we might think, oh, this is so that he can tear into private, right? But no, that's what's second. He doesn't scold them. There were no harsh words. Instead, Jesus simply sits down and invites all 12 of the disciples to sit with him. By calling the 12, we see Jesus essentially equalize the disciples' status among the group. Jesus' behavior resets the mood in the room, now one of respect and patience and love. It's as if Jesus recognized that embarrassment they felt on the way when he was asking them a question, and that he wanted to counteract that feeling with something else, so that they're more inclined to be open with him, open with one another, and really learn from Jesus. And with his statement, whoever wants to be first must be last of all and servant of all, they immediately know that they're being taught what discipleship looks like according to this man's standards, according to God's standards. Recall that just a chapter earlier, Jesus made a similar statement regarding how the disciples are supposed to view human worth and status. So when they hear servant of all, that's contrary to the world's definition of greatness. They know that. To be a servant in Jesus' time meant that you did whatever your master told you to do, and that usually meant you served food to other people. You ate last. If there wasn't enough food, you didn't eat at all. You were the lowly of society. You had such a low rank and very limited freedom. So Jesus' disciples undoubtedly understood what that meant to be servant. And by saying last of all and servant of all, Jesus makes clear immediately what it looks like to be a disciple, to thrive in the life and identity of Jesus, to fulfill God's hope for humanity, even if they didn't understand exactly how that would happen. It's important to note here that Jesus says the word all twice in one sentence, almost as if he knows the disciples have people in mind they'd rather not serve. They're immediately coming to mind. And then something odd happens. It's at this point in the lesson that Jesus brings a child into the group. And then, not into the group, but into his being, right there, telling the disciples that welcoming this child They not only welcome Jesus, but they also welcome God. Who is this child? Where did this child come from? And why is Jesus interrupting his message with somebody else in her group? When there's a sudden disruption like this, it's time to pay attention. The child is the epitome of this lesson Jesus is giving. He is the member of the lower class, because in the time of Jesus, in that society, children had no value. They were seen as non-persons and essentially a burden to the economy because they were too young to work. As such, a child would never be welcomed into a group of adults learning from their teacher, let alone become the center of attention. But perhaps for our generation, it's a little difficult for us to understand because it's more socially acceptable to welcome a child into a group in a setting like that. Our perspective of children is very different from our first century ancestors. So make an adjustment. When you read this text, try replacing little child with homeless person or mentally disabled. Or what about even criminal? Whoever welcomes one such criminal in my name welcomes me. That's tough. It's tough to contemplate what that looks like in our everyday life. But Jesus asserts that showing kindness to this one person is the same as showing kindness to God. For Jesus, the service with the lowly in society is the disciples' priority. A priority. That means our focus as followers of Christ is not on having the most powerful position in the company, not on attaining the most wealth, and not on getting accepted to the best university, and certainly not being the best fill in the blank. When you really think about what Jesus is saying, it's liberating, isn't it? I mean, the competition, the self-comparisons to others, the pressure to meet society's definition of greatness, it's a load you can just remove from your shoulders because Jesus is not asking you to carry that load. It doesn't contribute to our Christian identity, and it certainly isn't the mission that Jesus is wanting us to fulfill. How liberating is that? To be clear, Jesus isn't asking us to do more and add more to our plate. Instead, Jesus invites us to reorder our heart, our minds, and our lives to his way of seeing people, including how we see ourselves. Because friends, each and every one of us have a worth independent of our titles and achievements. Every single one of you. And you. There is an organization that many of you may be familiar with called Walk to Emmaus. And several years ago, I was gifted with an opportunity to go on this 3-day spiritual journey with approximately 25 other women. I didn't know a single one of them, not any of them. But as I arrived, I noticed signs throughout all of the buildings that read, "No job talk." Everywhere you go, no job talk. Throughout the weekend, we were encouraged to get to know one another, but we were never allowed to reference our job titles, our positions, degrees earned, certifications held. None of that. It was really difficult at first, but as we engaged in discussion and reflection throughout the weekend, I noticed that I started to see Anna as Anna, a woman who loved animals. It's really fun to talk to. I didn't see her as Anna, the high-powered corporate attorney who was a lot smarter than me. Intimidation never entered into the relationship. Eliminating the job talk from our vocabulary encouraged each one of us to see the other through the lens of Jesus. Beyond our group and behind the scenes, there was another group of women and people who were there to meet any need we had. It could be food or comfort or temperature change, whatever it would be. That's what they were there to do, even before we could articulate our needs. They overwhelmed us with love, just the entire group. They humbled themselves and they served us without any kind of credit. We never knew who they were, and without them knowing who in the room was the greatest. It's almost as if they wanted to be last of all. Amen. This morning, you may feel that nudge on your heart to respond to God's love more fully and to maybe even join this church. If that's this morning for you, you. I welcome you to come forward during our hymn event